popular fiction. BBC4 has been studying his various screen incarnations very closely indeed.
It was my good friend Sir Arthur Conan Doyle who encouraged me to set down in print the adventures I shared with the detective Sherlock Holmes. It was Doyle who helped to secure publication of these memoirs in the pages of the Strand magazine.
Hi, cabby! Never mind, get in, Watson.
Yet no one could have predicted the extraordinary outpouring which was provoked by my modest literary efforts. Hundreds of films, hundreds of television dramas. Sherlock Holmes has appeared on the screen more than any other heroic figure in history or in fiction. Somewhere in the world, every exploit I described in print has been translated to the screen. And some I could never have imagined. Why, I wonder, has Sherlock Holmes remained so persistent a presence more than a century after he was first exposed to the dangers of detection?
Now I do like to be beside the seaside.
Is a key to his ceaseless fascination that there are so many Sherlocks? That his true identity has remained forever hidden?
Take your hands off!
Even from me.
Holmes! Holmes!
Could it be that the most compelling mystery in the career of the world...
If you're making a film in 1922 and you've got a choice between setting it in 1896 and setting it in 1922, it was much easier to go for a contemporary setting because you could argue that Sherlock Holmes was still a current character.
When the cinema began to talk, authenticity was the last thing on anyone's mind. Basil Rathbone and Nigel Bruce brought to the screen an altogether new kind of Holmes and Watson, both authoritative and entertaining.
Now, suppose you tell us all about it.
Well, this came from my brother Lloyd in the post 2 days ago.
You only get a real, genuine sense of personalities developing with voices. The sound is what makes Rathbone and Bruce so preeminent.
There seems to be a field day for crank messages. Look at that, Watson.
Curious?
May the 11th. That's today.
My father received just such a note before he was murdered.
Murdered?
Wearing the Eve and the Pony and Trap. Now, I find that very admirable.
You know, Watson, one of the most dangerous things in the world is the drifting and friendless woman.
After a dozen productions, Douglas Wilmer tactfully withdrew from the fray, fearing, as other actors had before him, the curse of Sherlock Holmes.
Wilmer thinks he's going to be typecast, as virtually every other actor to have achieved great success as Sherlock Holmes has feared. He's no longer a character actor, he's a character. There really is something to say in that all great Sherlock Holmes actors never shake it off. Rathbone never shook it off.
And it causes a certain unhealthy excitement among the criminal classes.
You wouldn't necessarily want to be the greatest success of Sherlock Holmes. I think most actors would like to do it once or twice. But any more than that, and you know, it could poison you.
Wilmer's replacement was Peter Cushing, someone who knew about curses and poisons from his years as a leading man in Hammer horror films. He had established his Holmes credentials in a Hammer version of the Germans' favourite, The Hound of the Baskervilles. Nigel Stock remained as Watson. Rather too much in the Nigel Bruce mould for my liking.
Watson, we have a few minutes to ourselves. Let us put them to good use.
Very well, Holmes. What is it you want us to do?
Sit down, my boy, and let me expound. Now, Whoever came in here could not have used that door because it was locked on the inside. So, now what about a window? Yes, it is also secure on the inside.
Cushing was a polite and gentlemanly Holmes, meticulous to the point of obsession with the details of detection, something the master would have appreciated.
It rained last night. Now here on the sill is the print of a boot in...
As Eileen Norwood had done in the silent era, he carried a much annotated copy of the complete Sherlock Holmes on set to keep his writers and directors on target.
But that isn't a footmark. No, it is something much more valuable. The wooden-legged man. Exactly.
While Cushing and Wilmer at the BBC were concerned to get things absolutely right, filmmakers elsewhere seemed to take pains to get things wrong in a frenzy of reinvention. From the 60s through the 80s, a set of not always likely actors portrayed dope fiend Sherlock, mad Sherlock, sci-fi Sherlock, elderly Sherlock, young Sherlock, and least likely of all, stupid Sherlock, courtesy of Michael Caine as Holmes and Ben Kingsley as Watson.
Watson is very clever at solving crimes, but no one will listen to him. So he invents a character called Sherlock Holmes, and he hires a drunken out-of-work actor to play him, and that's me.
Mr. Holmes? Is there any news, anything at all?
Sadly, no. But take heart, miss. Last night something occurred to Holmes and he suddenly realized how stupid he'd been.
Really?
Well, I didn't say stupid exactly.
And now he's off to continue the...
What I like about it is that Holmes was always very pompous. He was one of those people who knew everything. He was always right. And to prick that balloon is quite a lot of fun. And I don't think Conan Doyle would have minded too much.
What Doyle would have made of this is another matter. In his final confrontation with Moriarty, Holmes had revealed his prowess in the Oriental martial arts. But this use of violin fou is surely a step too far. While all these alternative versions were being produced around them, the people at ITV were happy to place their trust in the authentic Sherlock.
There's a sort of comfort in going back to the time when it's always 1895. It's a more ordered world, perhaps. It's a world which is a little easier to understand than our post-nuclear world. It's a form of escapism.
Pretty young woman crossing the street.
And I was quite glad to escape into it.
Incidentally, I have glanced over your latest account of my work.
Oh, yes.
Honestly, I cannot congratulate you upon it.
This Holmes, played by Jeremy Brett, stayed faithful to the guidance of my writings.
Deduction, a cold, unemotional subject. You have attempted to tinge it with romanticism, which has much the same effect as if you'd worked a love story or an elopement into the fifth proposition of Euclid. Who can that?
What do we have here? A Sherlock Holmes with the fire and ice of the original?
Jeremy was very, very determined that he would stick as far as possible to what Doyle wrote.
Don't go, Doctor. I may need you.
I mean, he used to carry the book around with him. And if ever he found bits of dialogue which were different from the dialogue that Doyle had written, he would immediately spot it and say, that's not Doyle. And he would drag it back to that, or always.
Your case is most interesting.
Jeremy had an edginess about him.
Something else has occurred to you.
And he discovered this dark side to himself, which is very much part of his Holmes.
I have come to you. This letter arrived through the post this morning, which you will perhaps read for yourself.
Envelope, please. London postmark, October 7. Man's thumb mark on corner. Probably postman. Best quality paper. 6p a packet. Particular man in his stationery. Watson.
Be at the third pillar from the left, outside the Lyceum Theatre tonight at 7 o'clock. If you're distrustful, bring 2 friends. You are a wronged woman and shall have justice.
Intense, cold, impatient, rude.
Well, really, this is a...
Yet someone so quick to demonstrate his excitement at the prospect of the chase.
Why, then you and I shall go together. What? Dr. Watson is the very man. Your correspondent says 2.
At another encounter in a London theatre, this time the Shepherd's Bush Theatre, Jeremy Brett revealed how difficult it could be to keep the company of the great detective.
You're more like Watson, though, really, personally, than you are Sherlock Holmes yourself.
Well, I think...
I mean, you're a kindlier soul yourself.
I find Holmes incredibly difficult to wear.
When you say wear, you take on...
Yes, the mantle of him. Yeah. He is a dark, recluse, internal creature. And you can only show him through cracks in the marble, glimmers.
Yeah.
You can't... He's totally internal. And I find that's very hard to sustain. I mean, it's much more fun to be Watson say, well done, Holmes. Gosh, that was wonderful, excellent.
Yeah.
Because he's got that wonderful kind of enthusiasm. Yeah. Holmes is quite cool and dismissive and abrupt. And that's hard to sustain on a daily basis.
The best Holmeses, in terms of actors, have been those that have managed to capture the introspective, dark, brooding, depressive quality set against the man whose mind is racing, who doesn't sleep, doesn't eat. I love Holmes pacing up and down, bored and irascible, before someone walks up the stairs and brings him a case.
And what time would you like your dinner, Mr. Holmes?
8:30, the day after tomorrow.
The fact that he's pretty much a manic depressive is probably an important aspect of his abiding power as a fictional character.
Watson, look. What a face.
Throughout the decade in which he embodied Sherlock Holmes, Jeremy Brett struggled himself with manic depression.
He was playing out some of his own demons in the character of Holmes. Somebody once said to him in the early days, do you think there's something of the manic depressive about Sherlock Holmes? And he was furious because he didn't think that was part of the text. But I think he was even then beginning to be aware that it was part of his life and his problem. In the later stages, when the clashes between medication for his heart problems and medication for his manic depression produced a tension and a sort of near breakdown that was bound to affect the performance. He was, I mean, very brave to carry on at times, I think.
Thank you, Mrs. Hudson. Is that look a reproach?
No. No, I'm often up at this hour.
When I was admitted to the Maudsley Hospital in 1986, I mean, I was so confused I couldn't relate to anything or anyone around me. All I could do was lie face down with my fists clenched in my face. I believe I've been coping with these severe mood swings for many more years than I like to think.
Holmes?
Being a member of a profession where being a little mad helps, my moods were tolerated far more readily than if I worked in a bank or a school. What do you know about dreams?
Why do you ask?
Why? I'm walking through infernal territory and you ask why?
I only meant... I don't know what I meant.
It is my success which gave me the courage to admit publicly that I had this illness as an encouragement to others, that it had not stopped me from being employed, leading a fulfilled and successful life. My dream is horrible. I'm fighting with Moriarty at the Falls. And suddenly I'm overwhelmed with a sense of loss, fear. Yes, fear.
Jeremy Brett died within a year of the final broadcast of a heart attack. This new century offers us a Sherlock Holmes who descends deeper still into the mists of madness. Now he is asked to apply his deductive methods to the mind of a serial killer. This is the territory of Hannibal Lecter, Cracker and Silent Witness. Does Holmes belong here?
I mean, most of the murders that Holmes deals with are crimes of passion or accidents that have been covered up or something of that sort, and he's not pitted against a sort of, you know, crazed, lust-murdering, you know, deranged psychopath. But I was aware of the fact that somehow he seemed like the right person to be doing that, because Holmes is the sort of first profiler. You know, when John Douglas, the FBI profiler, talks about his work, he says it's the person that it was his childhood hero was Sherlock Holmes, and that Holmes, 100 years before the police, is profiling. He is working as a sort of forensic detective.
Get on the telephone to Scotland Yard and tell us straight this is the body of Lady Alice Pentney.
What?
Duke and Duchess of Narborough's daughter.
I mean, Holmes was not much for the psychological approach, was he? I mean, he understood how people behaved, but I don't think he was into some of the darker recesses of their minds, as more recent Holmeses have been.
Have you travelled much, Sherlock?
I've always held that travel narrows the mind. On the whole, it's best I should not leave the country. It causes an unhealthy excitement among the criminal classes.
In this detective story for the 21st century, Rupert Everett's Holmes converses after dinner with the fiancée of his Dr. Watson.
I warn you against some of the doctors.
She is presented, would you believe, as an American psychoanalyst.
It is, I have to say, an indispensable reference for anyone interested in sexual derangement.
Thank you.
You may keep it.
You're most kind.
It has a wonderful array of perversions. Sadomasochism, bestiality, exhibitionism, transvestism, coprophilia.
I'm out of the room for 10 minutes.
Pederasty, necrophilia, rape, mutilation.
Look what happened.
Lust, murder.
At least Everett's Holmes appears shocked by all this talk.
Holmes. Strong and black, please, Watson.
I thought it was completely and utterly absurd. It was so out of its time. For example, all the knowledge about sexual sadism and psychopathy, bearing in mind Freud had only written The Interpretation of Dreams. I think it was published in 1899. Psychoanalysis hardly existed in those days. So I think it was a very strange attempt to bring modern knowledge to a character from a completely different period.
In the end, of course, deduction will lead even the most modern Holmes into the criminal's lair.
Release her or I will shoot!
Can you be sure of your aim?
Let her go.